Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church. It is so good to be with you today. I hope you're having a wonderful day or a wonderful previous few days. I hope you're experiencing life to the fullest. And I hope that you're excited about tomorrow. Now, I realize some people probably aren't, but that's okay. They could be. And that's kind of what this passage I want to talk to you about says today. It's from Romans chapter 12 and verses 1 and 2. So let's hear the words. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He's done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Okay, let me start at the end, and then I'll come back. It says here, then you will learn to know. What does the word know mean there? It means to understand. But it means more than understand. It means to be convicted of. As someone would say, you know because you know because you know. It means to grasp without any doubt and without any concern something. So what is the something here? That you may know, learn to know, God's will for you. Now, whatever God's will is for you, and I believe God has a plan for every one of us, nothing can change God's plan, God's will for you. Circumstances can't change it. Events can't change it. Now, you can avoid it, as Jonah did when he was told to go to Nineveh. Instead, he heads the other direction, gets into a mess, and then comes back and says, okay, God, I'll do what you want. You can avoid God's plan by choosing to not follow Him. But nothing can change God's plan, God's will for your life, except you. And you have to keep choosing against God in order for even that to happen. It says, then you will learn to know God's will for you. Now here's what His will is. It's good and pleasing and perfect. Do you hear that? God's will for you. God's desire for you. God's plan for you is good and pleasing and perfect. Now, let's go back to the first verse. Brothers and sisters, as the scriptures call Christians, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He's done for you. Now, He doesn't mean to make a human sacrifice. He means to give your will, your life, your choices, your sense of direction, your allegiance to God. Because of what He's done for you. Well, what has He done for me? Life's been miserable. Well, but you've had life. Watch the news. See all of those folks that don't have it. I mean, recently some former Marine goes out and kills 4 people for no apparent reason. They don't have life anymore. 50-some thousand people die on the highway because of drunk driving every year in the United States. They don't have life anymore. You see, you have life. That's a given. The question is, what are you going to do with it? And it goes on to say here, Let them, that's your life, be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. I heard it said one time, the problem with people putting their lives on the altar is to keep taking it back. See, it's one thing to say, okay, God, if you'll just do such and such, I'll follow you. But then you got to follow him. And then you got to follow him even on the days when it doesn't feel like you want to follow him. Then you got to follow him not only in the good times, but in the bad times. Or so you describe them as bad. God may describe them as educational. God may understand that in order for something to happen 5 years down the road, this has to happen today. But we can't see 5 years down the road, so we don't like what happens today. Well, it says here to make your life a living and a holy sacrifice, the kind that he will find acceptable. So what is that? It's choosing to give your life to the Lord. It says this is the way to worship him. Worshiping God is nothing more. It's not a ceremony, though you can do that. It's not a tradition, though you can do that. Worshiping God is giving all that you have and all that you are to his call on your life. Now, if you haven't done that one, well, do it. What have you really got to lose? But then it goes on to say, don't copy the behavior and customs of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. A lot of people, a lot of groups talk about the ways of the world, and they talk about clothing or activities. You can't be godly and do this. You can't be godly and wear that. But that's not what this passage says. In fact, it doesn't even mention that. It says, be transformed by the way you think. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it really means is to think God first. Not you first, not what you learned first. To think God first. What is it God wants me to do? What is God trying to teach me? How can I please God? Understanding the grace and the mercy and the compassion of God is the key to living it. But in order to do that, we have to think differently than the way the world has taught us to think. And particularly here in the United States, where we have everything. I mean, my goodness gracious, just go in the grocery store and see how many options you have and how irritated you get if some of the spots on the shelves are empty. Half of the world doesn't even have one row of a grocery store here. We have to think like Jesus thought. We have to put ourselves in the position of those who struggle. We have to put ourselves to where we think about others first. As we allow God to transform the way we think, that will transform the way we live. So we worship God by offering our lives to him. As we worship him, we sacrifice a truly acceptable sacrifice. And we transform the way we think in order to, go back to the first thing I said, in order to learn God's will for you. Well, I hope you're doing that. If you're not, try it. Thanks for listening. If you have a prayer concern or a need, let us know. We'll do everything we can as fast as we can to help meet your need. God bless you. I'll talk to you again.